Hello and welcome back to the No Huddle podcast. This is the first episode of the off season, and today we're going to be doing some hot takes. If you guys didn't see, about a week ago, I put out a video saying, give me your best hot takes in the comments below. Put it out on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and we ended up with over 50 submissions, which, let me just say, I was so surprised by that. I love you guys. I love the support on that, and it really made my job fun because I got to filter through all of those and a bunch of great takes in there, but I chose my favorite four to really delve into and give a really solid reaction to. And if you guys enjoy this sort of stuff, I'm happy to make this a monthly thing where we get some hot takes and react to them. But again, only if you guys enjoy it going forward. Just before we get started, if you are looking for a place to keep up with all of your offseason content, we'll be here all throughout the NFL offseason. We're going to be reacting to free agency. We're going to be doing draft work, draft predictions. We're going to be delving into all of that. That'll all be on this channel. So if you're looking for a place there, go ahead and subscribe. It'll be great. This will be your one-stop shop for everything. So with that being said, let's get started. This first take comes courtesy of quite a few people. I think it was the most common take of all of them. But the strongest was from Dewmaster, who said, Patriots will take a major step backwards next season and barely go above 500. Like I said, a few other people who said that, a few other people who had said they're going to miss the playoffs, etc. But this is the one we got here. So here's what we know. The Super Bowl hangover has been really, really strong in the last few years, to put it bluntly. Kansas City, of course, lost Super Bowl last season. They ended up missing the playoffs. They won 6 games, and their quarterback tore their ACL. San Francisco, after they lost the Super Bowl, they also ended up missing the playoffs, winning 6 games. And then the year before that, Philadelphia had the supernatural funk. I don't know if you remember, they started off 10-1. They lose to the Niners, and then they have their coaching mess. It's a whole ordeal. And yeah, Philadelphia kind of just falls apart. Cincinnati, the 2 previous years, Cincinnati ended up making the AFC Championship game, and so did Kansas City. So that's kind of where we are recently as far as Super Bowl losers. And then the last team to actually even win the Super Bowl was all the way back in 2018. And it was the Patriots, end of the Tom Brady Patriots era, them beating the Rams and getting the last ring with Brady at the helm. With all that being said, yes, I did just lead off with a lot of negative. If you expand it to the last 15 years, 10 out of the 15 teams who lost Super Bowl are back in the playoffs. And a lot of them won 10 to 12 games. I just think it's more that these teams suffered from injury downfalls. They had major coaching changes, their quarterback gets injured, stuff like that. Not necessarily the fact that, they made the Super Bowl and lost, and that's the reason why. I think that is a fair critique, as if you don't think the Patriots are going to be back in the AFC Championship game, if you don't think they're going to win the division. I think that's a fair reason to say, well, they're coming off a Super Bowl loss. But to say they're not going to make the playoffs entirely is kind of insane, because this Patriots team didn't get any coaching talent poached. Of course, I think they're keeping Josh McDaniels. I think they're actually getting back their DC, who had cancer all year. This is a team that's incredibly young. Your superstar quarterback isn't going to get extended this offseason because he's only in his third year. So they're not going to have to worry about paying the quarterback. They have a ton of room to improve this offseason because with a few simple cap restructures and cap cuts, like Stephon Diggs being cut can save $15 million. They're going to have a ton of money. Again, like they did last season. And we saw what they did last season. They added a few impact players, and what do you know, they're in the Super Bowl. So I don't necessarily see a vision where the Patriots just fall off completely. I remember also they still have all 11 draft picks because this team didn't really go all in. They actually, I don't know if you remember, it's been quite a while. They were trading off pieces. They were trading off Kyle Duggar, who didn't fit. And yeah, weren't necessarily buyers at the deadline. So they still have all of their draft capital for this offseason. It's a team that can really do whatever they want in the offseason. They can swing for a major receiver. Big advocate. If you go back to that Super Bowl, they had nobody that could separate. Stephon Diggs is their wide receiver 1, ended up with 1 catch. So I would swing for a major receiver. I would go AJ Brown. It's what I've been saying the entire season. I think it checks out. I trust Vrabel to be able to handle that kind of personality in the locker room. I think AJ Brown getting away from Nick Sirianni at this point is just better for everybody involved. But if not AJ Brown, an Alec Pierce would work. Someone who can be that major threat for them. I don't even think Romeo Doubs is a bad idea. Just adding some sort of receiver threat would really, really help them. And not to mention, they're going to have 11 draft picks. So those offensive line problems should be better. Will Campbell off the MCL injury and some rehab should be better. And I know the vibes on Drake May are low after that, frankly, not great Super Bowl performance. But he just narrowly lost the MVP. He clearly showed he can be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. We saw that all throughout this season. This wasn't yes, the schedule is a fair complaint as far as his being an MVP, but we know he can be a really good quarterback. At the very least, we saw what he did against Baltimore. We saw what he did in the first Buffalo game, leading them to a win. and then actually getting a 17-0 lead on Buffalo before, some Josh Allen heroics, and that was kind of it on that one. Not to mention the Dolphins. This is just happened today. They're basically they're resetting. They let go of Tyreek Hill. They let go of Bradley Chubb. Tua Tagovailoa looks to be on the move, so they could be starting Quinn Ewers next year. So them and the Jets are 4 free wins, so that gets you to like nearly halfway to that 500 mark. So I understand the concerns about, yes, they are now going from what was one of the easiest schedules in the last 25 years to a pretty difficult schedule where they're going to have to play Seattle again. And they have a bunch of other big marquee games now because they've won their division. But so yeah, I don't necessarily imagine them winning 14 games again, but missing the playoffs in its entirety seems pretty extreme. And that seems like something that is just coming because it was a week after the Super Bowl. Barring crazy injuries. If Drake May goes down, then yeah, they definitely will miss the playoffs. But I don't necessarily see a vision where outside of, again, the big injury, I don't know what would cause them to miss the playoffs entirely. Because they're keeping their quarterback, they're keeping their core players, they're keeping their coaching staff. That's a big one. We've seen in the last few years how important it is to keep the coaching staff. So we'll see. Next take. This is from Dolan. We have the Giants are winning the NFC East. Of course, this is just a few weeks after the Giants hired John Harbaugh, whose Ravens team has been, orbiting around the playoffs, contender status for the last 7 years, right around whenever Lamar first came in. On paper, they have only $7 million of cap space, but literally just restructuring Brian Burns and Dexter Lawrence gets them to over $40 million of cap space. To me, this is a take of just how much faith do you have in Jackson Dart and Cam Scatterbo? Plus, the Giants actually being a competent football team. Because on paper, there is something here, but the problem is that we have said that about the Giants for the last year as well. I swear to God, I've said that about them a few years ago. It seems like every time they have something there, something goes heinously wrong. Either it's incompetent coaching, like you start Russell Wilson to start the year, even though he's clearly not particularly great. Whether that's, if you go back, Daniel Jones has that one really good year, they extend him, and that's a whole mess, and then he ends up really struggling. So this year, they had one of the best defensive lines in football. I don't know if you remember, because again, it's been a while. But we didn't head into the year thinking Seattle had the best D-line. It was about, a lot of the talk was about the Giants, because they were coming in with Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau, like the Carter. There were guys on that line, and it didn't ever really work. So they also could have had the number 1 pick this year. That would have helped this take a lot, but they ended up choking the tank at the end like they always do, so they're at 5. But they still could grab a real difference maker. So I saw a mock draft say that they would go Caleb Downs just because best player available, and then you add him to Javon Holland. So like you get John Harbaugh, his like Kyle Hamilton, god tier safety right away. And I think that would be really fun. But for me, this take just has to have way too many things that need to go right for this take to happen. First and foremost, you are banking on a ton of injured guys to stay healthy or come back in full force. You would need Malik Neighbors off of that giant ACL injury to come back in full strength. You would need Cam Scatterbo, whose leg was going the other way, to come back in full strength. You would need Andrew Thomas, who can seemingly never stay healthy for a full season. But when he's out there is one of the best tackles in the league. You would need him to be out there for every single game, realistically, to win the NFC East. And then last and foremost, you need Jackson Dart to stay healthy, which Jackson Dart suffered like 4 concussions this season. It was really bad. And then they had to try and adjust the way he played. And then that looked really bad. Because I don't know if you remember, he had like one game with like 34 passing yards. It was some heinous stuff. So again, just so much has to go right. You need to have Jackson Dart not only take a step to find a way to stay healthy, you would also need him to be a lot more comfortable in the pocket and still be able to run and learn how to get down. You would need Cam Scatterbo to come back fully healthy. You would need Malik Neighbors to come back fully healthy. You'd have to, and as far as Jackson Dart, like, yes, a second-year leap is possible. Like, we saw with Drake, he showed flashes just like Jackson Dart had, and then this year he really put everything together. But I don't know how confident I am with that happening with Matt Nagy leading the helm. If this was Todd Monken, I'd feel a lot better. But Todd Monken ended up actually getting hired by the Browns as their head coach. So I don't know. I don't know where that second-year leap would come from. If you really think Matt Nagy could be a quarterback whisperer, I would point you to Mitch Trubisky. Or, the way these Chiefs offenses have looked in the last few years. I don't know why the hell they went Matt Nagy of all things. So, I don't know. To me, it's just so much has to go right. They also hired Jannard Wilson, who I think is a solid DC, but again, not like a major game changer at the DC spot. And I think Harbaugh, and him will get something out of this defense and defensive line. It's just, again, such a large leap. You'd have to fix the offensive line issues. You'd have to fix the secondary linebacker issues all in the same offseason. You would need a lot of guys to take just giant steps forward. And the Giants this season were just so bad. Like, they were terrible against the run. Like, I don't know if you remember, the Niners could not run all year against anybody. But they ran for like 200 yards on the Giants. That's like a pretty good indicator of that. It would take a hell of a draft class. It would take great injury luck to even put them in a spot for the division. And even though I have not been high on Philadelphia historically, I have not been high on Dallas. I don't necessarily see either of those two being a true contender next year. They aren't cupcakes. Like, I think it's much more likely that they get 9 wins and they eke out the division as opposed to like the Giants coming in and taking it. And if I had to bet on like one dark horse team in the NFC East, I think I'd go Commanders. Because I just trust those guys a little more. If Jaden can stay healthy, that's the only big if for them. You know that they have a superstar quarterback. You know, a guy who can be a superstar quarterback. I'll phrase it like that. You know they have a guy there. They have a good front office that built a roster that went to the NFC Championship game. This, you kind of have nothing. You have John Harbaugh, who, yes, in theory, had built a culture of winning. But they also still have one of the worst GMs in the league. They decided to keep their GM, Joe Shine. And I don't know what that power dynamic is going to look like. If John Harbaugh has full reins, then yeah, sure, I think I could start to see this a little bit more. But that goober is still in office, or is still leading the charge. So I don't know. For a take that has to have so many things go right, I think there's just way too many fault points where this could go wrong. So as much as I appreciate the boldness of the take, I'm going to have to disagree. Moving on. This is from Bahir Acharya. I think this one's on Instagram. His take is pretty simple. It's just that he believes the Niners would win the Super Bowl if they had Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, and George Kittle healthy. What I will say, as a Niners fan, again, so let's address the bias. They're a lot more competitive with those guys, for sure. We got one game of a healthy 49ers team with no injuries, or even one quarter, and they beat Seattle, in Seattle by 4, which was the largest loss Seattle took all year, actually. Fun fact. They'd only lost by 3 to Tampa and 2 to the Rams. And that was it as far as them losing for the season. And yeah, I get that it's week 1. That has been the large thing anytime that that game is brought up. It's like, oh, it's week 1. But Seattle was still flying around on defense. That was still that same really good Seattle unit. It's just the difference is that Nicky Manwarrior went down in that game, which, yes, is a huge, huge thing to shift. But also George Kittle went down in the first quarter of that game as well. So if you want to argue chemistry, like Seattle was just more cohesive as a unit. Like Tariq Woolen got better throughout the season. Like, yeah, I think that's fair. But with all that being said, as much as I want to buy this one, I can't. Because the path to us winning the Super Bowl would have been knocking out Seattle one time at the very least. So either in week 18 and getting home field, and then who knows if you end up playing Seattle, or if all things stay the same, you'd have to go into Seattle and win in the divisional round, which would have been one hell of a task. It really would have been just one crazy task. And then after that, your gift would have been the Los Angeles Rams, which is a team that, even though historically there has been some success with the Niners against the Rams, I just don't know if the secondary had the horses to deal with Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, and Devontae Adams in a playoff game. Extraordinarily difficult. I think if you ignore the rest of the NFC, like if you ignore the Rams and the Seahawks existing, then yeah, if you want to plop the Niners in the Super Bowl against the Patriots with those guys healthy, I think that's pretty fair. I think they definitely win that game. But them getting out of the NFC gauntlet is where I think that you would start to see how thin the Niners were in certain spots. Like, you still have no receivers, because this is assuming, at least there's no mention of Brandon Ayuk, so this isn't saying Brandon Ayuk is fully healthy and participating. So you still have no receivers, and you still have Ricky Pearsall going down all the time. You still have a crap center. You still have an interior offensive line that would not work against Seattle. They got manhandled by Seattle at full strength. And you have a defense that fundamentally was built to be carried by a few guys. You still have, it would be Nick Bosa, it would be Fred Warner. This take doesn't even have Michael Williams in it, so I can't say him to stop the run. Upton Stout at the end of the year, Deommodore Lenoir, and that's about it. It would be one hell of a carry job by those guys to defend against Seattle and the Rams and the Patriots in that world. I'm not going to sit here and say it would have been impossible, but a certainty is like hell no. It would have been a less than like 20% chance. A side take from this, I don't think this isn't like the main year that the Niners got fucked by injuries, in my opinion. Like, if you go back, the Niners have had to deal with so many injury-riddled seasons. But in 2023, if Dre Greenlaw is healthy, they beat the Chiefs. You for sure have a ring. If you go to 2022, if Brock Purdy's healthy, who knows? You complete one of the greatest football stories of all time, Mr. Irrelevant as a rookie winning the Super Bowl. Who knows? And then I think this gets swept under the radar by Niners fans because of how the game went. If you go to 2021, Jimmy Garoppolo and Trent Williams both played that Rams game with massive injuries that required surgery, and both of them played some of the worst games of their career because they tried to play through injury, which was really bad. And I don't know if you remember, there was a whole drama of Jimmy G that offseason because he needed surgery, and that's why they couldn't trade him. And then Trent Williams, it looked like he had lost a step. He was that bad in that game. So if those guys are healthy, that Niners team already almost beat the Rams. They probably do, and then they'd already beaten the Bengals. That team probably wins the Super Bowl, and we have a crazy different alternate timeline where who knows, Jimmy G is still here, Matthew Stafford doesn't have a Super Bowl, all that. So that a little bit of a side tangent, but I think it's really impressive what the Niners did all year to be able to deal with that many injuries. It's a testament to that coaching staff. But the division and the NFC, this was something I talked about in the previous podcast. I think the NFC West has just caught up to the way the Niners are built as currently constructed. The Niners have been the main team that teams in the NFC look to okay, those are the guys we have to beat. And yeah, you can be like, well, they don't have a ring. Well, they're always at the top of the leaderboard whenever they're healthy. That has been the concern of teams. How do we get past the Niners? And especially in division. Like the Seattle Seahawks, if you look at the way they are built, I mentioned this 100 times, they are built to beat the Niners. They have their strengths where the Niners have their weaknesses. They have the advantage of hindsight in that we have been getting our ass kicked by this team a few times. Let's go get the coach that had success against them. Let's go get the interior. Let's go bolster interior defensive line like crazy because we know we can get them there. And let's go get a guy who can, play anywhere. He can go guard a George Kittle and Nicky Manwarie. So I think it would be, I think this offseason is going to be huge. You're going to have to adapt. You can't just run things back the Niners way. You can't just do that, ignore the offensive line. You can't just do the typical Niners offseason. You're going to have to change things up. All right, moving on. This is from Jonathan, and there's a few other people who've had this take. The take was that they necessarily want the Chiefs to be good, and that they thought that the NFL this season, they thought the overall quality of play this year has gone down significantly, and they think that's part of that is because the Chiefs have struggled this year, and just in general that the teams weren't that good. What I will say to that is I think we are forgetting the Chiefs of last year. Do we not remember how they won those games? What was it? 12 one-score games that they came out of, and it felt like it was some bullshit every time. We can say that in hindsight because we saw the other end of that table this season where they ended up in 8 one-score games and they ended up 1-7 and out of the playoffs. But last year it was the inverse. It was every single way they would find a way, something magical would have to go their way, and they would win the game. Whether they get a blocked kick, they get a 4th and 26 PI call, all that stuff. And do we not remember the fact that they lost the Super Bowl 40-6 against Philadelphia? If you plop the Chiefs against Seattle this year, it'd be a pretty similar result. And if you plop the Chiefs as they're currently constructed into this postseason, let's say hypothetically they magically won it or magically won their division or something and slid into the postseason, they would have been first-round exits, even with a healthy team, because they were just a bad team this year. This core will only get older too. Kelsey's getting older. Chris Jones seems to only have a few really great games in him left, and we didn't see many of them this season. And they still need to extend core guys. Creed Humphrey's got to get paid. There's a lot of rumors of them moving on from Trent McDuffie. Mahomes is coming off an ACL tear. I think that in general, if you go back to the zooming out take, I think that it isn't that there wasn't a good or dominant team. There wasn't a team, who was it felt like they were the main threat to everybody. It's just a year where something that we have seen a trend to continue from last year, and that we're starting to see a shift in the NFL landscape. I think we're moving away from, true superstar quarterbacks just carry bad offenses or questionable defenses to just winning the Super Bowl. I don't know how often we're going to result Super Bowl 58, where Patrick Mahomes goes out there with just a dog shit offense and a solid defense and wins a Super Bowl through a tough path. I don't know if we're going to get something like that again for a little while. I don't know if we're going to get, at this point, we talked about Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson are definitely going to win one at some point, but the way those rosters are constructed, I don't see a world where they can just backpack that team to the Super Bowl. We have had a pretty consistent trend of just the most complete, most healthy team wins. Seattle dealt with no injuries the entire season, and then one major injury they had ended up helping them in Zach Charbonnet. And as well, you look back at Philadelphia last year, It was an insanely talented roster that, again, dealt with like no injuries. And the one injury they did suffer kind of made them better as well. If you remember, Nakobe Dean was out. Oren Burks came in, and Oren Burks played really, really well for them. And I think another part of that is just that defenses have gotten way better as of late. If you look at the units that Seattle and Houston trotted out, I think they're the two best defenses we've seen in the last few years. Them, the 2023 Ravens, maybe the Eagles from last year, that defense. We're starting to see really, really good defenses as well. And I also think another part of this, and people why like, whoa, did you miss the Chiefs? I just don't think people didn't have a common enemy. For the first time in 2019, or for the first time since 2019, there was no juggernaut to hate watch, which is really weird. We are used to hate watching the Chiefs. We're used to hate watching the Patriots with Tom Brady. There were just a lot of good teams. It just took a while for them to sort of unearth themselves and claim themselves as like, okay, we're not just good, we're real contenders at the Super Bowl. It wasn't a thing where there was no good teams. The Seahawks are a really good team that could compete with other Super Bowl winners. The Rams were a really good team that competed with the Seahawks. The Patriots still won 14 games and went on and beat Houston, which had, again, one of the best defenses I've ever seen. Chicago, Denver, Buffalo, Jacksonville, Houston, those are all good playoff teams if you zoom out and compare this playoff field to other playoff fields. I don't necessarily see a vision of, well, they were just, all the teams were bad. I think that was a take that I had, like, when we got to week 12, and then I started to see those teams really separate themselves like they always do. Like, yeah, people don't like the Patriots, but there aren't some super team. We saw that. They were just a young team that had a good quarterback. The Seahawks hadn't won a Super Bowl in over a decade. People loved watching the Rams. The Eagles weren't good this year, despite them winning the division and making the playoffs. I think there was no one to hate, fundamentally. And I think that's the reason why people miss the Chiefs and think, oh, well, no one was that good this year. And to that crowd, I say, hey, you know what? Give them a year. I don't think they'll be back to their bullshit Chief status this year. I think that roster just needs so much retooling. But 2027, they'll probably retool and be right back. So, as much as people may have missed the Chiefs this postseason or whatever, I think people just needed somebody to hate. And we did not have, really, there was no hateable team. I mean, I guess if you were like a division rival, like, yeah, I didn't like the Seahawks, but that's because I'm a Niners fan. That has nothing to do with the fact that they are like an unlikable team or some juggernaut or something, or like some unbeatable squad or something like that. Okay, yeah, so those are just my favorite takes of them all. If you guys enjoy this again, I think we'll be back at this in a few weeks. I'd love to get a collection of new takes in, maybe after free agency. We can get some fun stuff. But yeah, I want to thank you guys so much for listening. I know it's a little bit different. This is a little bit shorter than our, usual like hour 10 log podcast. I just thought that this would be really fun. So I want to thank you guys again so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, if you're listening to this on YouTube, a subscription would be great. Like the video, of course. If you could follow us, if you're listening on Spotify, that'd be great as well. And yeah, I want to thank you guys so much, and I hope you have a phenomenal day.